Vitaly Portnikov. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has sent Indian military personnel to participate in Russian Belarusian military exercises. 65 Indian servicemen have been stationed at the Russian Mulino training ground, 65 kilometers from Nizhny Novgorod. The Ministry of Defense of India stated that their presence and joint training with Russian soldiers will help strengthen defense cooperation between the Russian Federation and India. The fact that the Indian government decided to send a contingent to the Russian Belarusian exercises is yet another demonstration of Narendra Modi's desire to strengthen relations with Russia and China amid ongoing pressure from US President Donald Trump. Another such step was the presence of the Indian Prime Minister at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, China. Before this, for 7 years, Narendra Modi had not visited the People's Republic of China, not even to participate in collective summits chaired by Xi Jinping. And the leader of the People's Republic of China avoided trips to India to participate in collective summits chaired by Narendra Modi. But now all of that is in the past. Despite the ongoing economic competition between China and India and the border disputes between the two countries. And if anyone can be credited for this emerging mutual understanding between New Delhi and Beijing, it's Donald Trump. Yes, without a doubt, the American president acted in a completely reasonable manner when he imposed 50% economic sanctions on the nation of India for their decision to purchase Russian oil. Although there are now serious doubts as to whether these sanctions were the cause rather than the pretext for the deterioration in relations between the United States and India, and whether Donald Trump decided to punish Narendra Modi, not so much for cooperating with Vladimir Putin, but rather to change the very balance of economic relations between Washington and New Delhi, or worse yet, to take revenge on Narendra Modi for the Indian Prime Minister's disregard for Trump's non-existent peacekeeping efforts in the latest conflict between India and Pakistan. However, from the standpoint of common sense, the United States and India could have at least held consultations before Donald Trump made these tariff decisions, given the strategic partnership between the two countries. After all, in the end, the United States has no other ally in the region when it comes to relations with China, and, judging by all appearances, will not have one in the foreseeable future. And the alliance of China, India, and Russia is a rather serious mechanism for undermining the position of the United States throughout Asia. Anyone making decisions about tariffs could have considered this perspective, but not Donald Trump. Of course, from a formal point of view, Narendra Modi should also consider the consequences of worsening his relations with the United States. But the political style of the Indian Prime Minister himself, as well as the ideology of his own party, dictate that Narendra Modi take a tougher stance toward any pressure from the West than previous Indian leaders might have. In order to stay in power, Narendra Modi needs to demonstrate to the citizens of India a sufficiently tough and confident attitude toward anything that might be perceived in India as disrespect for the country or as colonial pressure on its politics. That is why it seems Narendra Modi did not hesitate for long, and his relationships with China and Russia became the Indian Prime Minister's main trump card to show both Americans and his fellow citizens what his response to Donald Trump would look like. At the same time, the Prime Minister of India is demonstrating every willingness to find common ground with the American president. But we all understand perfectly well what this mutual understanding should look like, roughly the same as with China. Donald Trump should abandon his tariffs against India and thus forget about the idea that India should stop buying Russian oil. And in this situation, the American president is left with virtually no levers to put pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin. Thus, there is no longer any way to claim that he can force Putin to end the war through economic pressure. But of course, as this story develops, Narendra Modi is going further and further. It's one thing to have official talks on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and to embrace Vladimir Putin, whom Narendra Modi had called his close friend long before the conflict with Donald Trump. Throughout almost the entire period of the major Russian-Ukrainian war, the Prime Minister of India maintained warm relations with his Russian confidant, visited Moscow, and insisted that it was necessary to continue developing the strategic partnership between Russia and India. And even Narendra Modi's highly publicized trip to Kiev and his repeated public calls to end the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine did not in any significant way interfere with this strategic mutual understanding between Putin and Modi. But the presence of military personnel, especially at those exercises that are actually directed toward the West, where Russian and Belarusian soldiers will be practicing possible clashes with the troops of NATO member countries, and perhaps even aggression against neighboring Central European countries, against the backdrop of Russian drones appearing in the skies over Poland and Romania, no longer looks like a mere theory, but rather a possible development of historical events in Europe in the coming years or even months. This is a much more serious and powerful signal toward the West, and a demonstration that Donald Trump, through his inept policies, has pushed India away and deprived America and the West as a whole of a strategic partner. At the same time, it is clear that the situation will not improve, because right now the main trump card of the American president, in his attempt to find someone to blame for his failure to reach an agreement with Putin, is to call on European countries to impose tariffs against China and India, or to introduce some kind of sanctions against Chinese or Indian companies so that they stop buying Russian oil. Thus, we can predict a further rapprochement between China, India, and the Russian Federation, a continued loss of positions by the United States in Southeast Asia, and possible misunderstandings between the United States and the European Union regarding how to deal with New Delhi if the West wants to maintain any kind of relationship with India against the backdrop of cooling relations with Russia and China. Well, in short, as always, everything works out for Donald Trump. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, follow me on my social networks and on my Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatello channels, which help support these resources. Make use of the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Peace to you all.